and I had gone to buy fish, and there was no fish. And the women who were selling in the market, one of them told me, we're not selling fish anymore. People are saying they can't eat fish because the fish has eaten the Tutsi. How do you situate me in that space where the perpetrators are completely free and nobody is asking them any questions about why they're perpetrating genocide, but you are coming to ask me, have I stopped a genocide from happening? This generation has self-employed, they develop content, they are creative, they write, they do so many things. So for them, I would like to ask them to pay attention to this crime of genocide.
Hello there. Before we dive into today's conversation, have you subscribed to our channel yet? If you haven't, do so. And remember to share your thoughts with us in the comments below and like this video. Your support means a lot. Now let's get into it. Hello there. My guest this week on the long-form podcast is Alice Wairimu Nderitu. Alice has served as the United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide to the United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres since November 2020. I'm speaking to her on the sidelines of a 3-day conference on peace, resilience, and transformational justice that is being organized by Aegis Trust. Alice, welcome to the long form.
Thank you very much for having me.
Are you enjoying the Kigali weather?
Am I enjoying the Kigali weather? Yes, I am. I just wish I had come here in February when it's winter in New York. Yeah, because I left warm weather in New York and found warm weather here, and I just love it.
Yeah, I want to go straight into the first question. You're here in Rwanda to attend the Aegis Trust Listening and Learning Conference. I'd like to ask you, as a Kenyan, as an African woman, and as a UN official, when I say the word Rwanda, what does it mean to you?
As a Kenyan, as an African woman, as a UN official, as a Kenyan, I think about genocide. Like Rwanda, for us, I think my recollection, I think the most vivid recollection I have of Rwanda is, of course, from the history and geography books we were reading in our history, in our curriculum in Kenya. But then I also have this very vivid recollection of when the genocide against the Tutsi happened here in 1994.
What do you remember?
As a Kenyan, I always remember that my earliest recollection was going to the market, and I had gone to buy fish, and there was no fish. And the women who were selling in the market, one of them told me, we're not selling fish anymore. People are saying they can't eat fish because the fish has eaten the Tutsi. And so that for me, like, really brought it home. The news had been coming in, of course, we'd been reading in newspapers and everything, but to hear it from somebody like in the market making that connection. So people went through a whole period of time in Kenya when people didn't want to eat fish. People are saying, oh, you know, the rivers there are full of bodies, and there were all these photos. So that for me was very striking. But then, of course, that has changed in time. I've been to this country many times. I was here, I think my earliest recollection of coming here was we came here, we brought a group of journalists again, and here I am coming again with journalists, because that's what I've come to do beyond the Aegis conference. Yeah, we were here working on a plan of action to counter hate speech and prevent incitement to violence that could lead to genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity, with some media and journalists from all over the world. So that preceded the Aegis conference. But we did it with Aegis. We partnered with Aegis on that. So anyway, so we came here. I remember I was working for the Human Rights Commission in Kenya. And we came here, we brought journalists from Kenya.
What year was that?
That would have been 2004, I think, or no, 2000 and... Anyway, it was, I don't quite remember, 2003, I think. So we came here with the journalists, and we were coming here because we just had a referendum in Kenya, and that referendum, it was 2005, because the referendum was in 2005. And the referendum was very divisive, and there was lots of hate speech, and we thought, we need to take these people to Rwanda so that they can understand how things happen. This was long before Kenyans started coming to Rwanda to learn about this kind of thing. So we were really charting a new path. But I'd been here before on an assignment with the GIZ, and that was in 99, I think 99, 98. And we were working on the DDR program. So the rehabilitation aspect of it. So I remember Rwanda as a Kenyan in that way. And I know since then, because I've been here many times, but all the times I come here because my work has been around human rights and peace building. I bring people here to come and learn, to come and see what hate can produce. And I brought, as a Kenyan, working for... Now, after we came here, we had our violence in Kenya in 2007, 2008. And I began working in a commission. It's called the National Cohesion Integration Commission. One of the commissions that was set up by the former Secretary-General Kofi Annan to sort out the problems we had in Kenya. And that particular commission deals with ethnic issues. So I was in charge of education, and I was a commissioner in that commission, and I came here with 230 teachers from Kenya. We came by road, and then we drove throughout Rwanda. The whole idea, what we wanted them to do, because these teachers, they are script writers. They write scripts for the drama festival. In Kenya, we have what we call the drama festival, where you have we start at the district level. The schools compete against each other on one theme. So one theme is given to the entire country. And then the teachers write scripts, and then the students act out the scripts. And then they move to the next level until they get to the national level, and then we end up with about 8 of the best scripts. So we came here so that the teachers could get ideas on what to write about, because the theme then was on how to prevent ethnic conflict. So we went back, and it was a very fulfilling experience, watching the Rwandan experience informing this whole extracurricular activity going on and on. So as a Kenyan, I've had many experiences here in Rwanda, and many workshops. I've been here many times. As a woman, I'm always saying that my entire experiences of being in Rwanda, and I've visited before I took on this position, I visited so many of the memorials. Like when we came with the teachers, we went to so many of the memorials. And for me, I'm always speaking about Nyamata, what Nyamata means to me, because for me it is the memorial. And it is the memorial because of that woman who is lying there. And we were there yesterday, but now she's covered up in a coffin. But previously you could see her lying there with this stick, sharpened stick, very long stick, sharpened, that goes right through her. And she's lying there, like with that stick. And you can just imagine like what she went through. So for me, as a woman, when I think about Rwanda, I always think about her. I talk about her a lot, all the time. And I think about what she must have gone through. And for me, she's a symbol of so much that was wrong with the way people related to the extent of the genocide happening. Because for you to sharpen that kind of, I haven't seen it. It's the size of this, this vase here. For you to sharpen it intentionally to do that to another human being, the kind of hate that drives you to do that, I would like to imagine, like, we need to address the causality of that hate. Where is this coming from, and how can it be addressed? So, for as UN official, I hold the office of Special Advisor on Prevention of Genocide under Secretary-General, the topmost official on prevention of genocide in the United Nations. And what Rwanda means to me, if you read the letter that the Secretary-General, Kofi Annan, wrote to the Security Council on the appointment, on the creation of this office, he said, we need to have somebody who works as a special advisor on the prevention of genocide, somebody who will provide early warning and say this is coming, so that we prevent a genocide like that which happened in Rwanda. That's what it says. And it says, and a genocide like that which happened in Srebrenica. So he was very, very clear what he was trying to prevent. In his mind, he was very, very clear. He said, these genocides, they happened under the UN watch. The UN could have done more. The UN didn't do more. The UN could have put out early warning, could have said it's coming. And so that's why he created the office. So I'm very conscious. And that's why you find me often speaking to especially the people who were targeted in this genocide, the Tutsi and the Bosniak Muslims. I keep them very close to me in my heart because I do know that what happened to them informed the creation of the office that I am in.
Yeah. So you've been Undersecretary since 2020. But since then, we've seen the ingredients of genocide manifest in Sudan, Eastern DRC, Palestine, and Myanmar. Do you feel that you've been an effective and successful voice for the most vulnerable? And second question is, do you actually feel like you've been successful, and how do you measure that success?
I think if I'd been a successful voice for the most vulnerable, that would have to come from them. It would not be me saying that I've been a successful voice for them. I do know that privately, like, people speak to me and tell me, thank you so much for speaking for us. Thank you for so much for calling this genocide. By the time I was joining the UN, I found a resolution that described this genocide as a genocide against the Tutsi, in which Hutu and others who opposed it were killed. But people were calling it the Rwandan genocide. And I have made sure that people refer to this genocide in its proper name, the genocide against the Tutsi. And that might seem like a small thing, but if you can't even call what happened what it is, I mean, it's a really major thing. And so we have now documents. There's no document that's now coming out of the UN that doesn't refer to this genocide by its proper name as a genocide against the Tutsi. It's required so much explanation to everyone within UN circles, including member states, to understand that you can't see Rwandan genocide, that there is nothing like that. I think there's huge amounts of work in progress in the Eastern DRC. I think there's huge amounts of information to be put out. There is quite a bit of what I call this single narrative that keeps going out.
What do you mean?
I mean that that most of the time when you read like newspapers, you'll be seeing, they'll be talking about that there's a problem in the Kivus, and that problem is the M23. I've issued statements in the past. I've spoken at so many places in the past, and situated the problem the way it is. A problem of poor governance, a problem of those who escaped from Rwanda going to Eastern DRC, and who are not held accountable as perpetrators of this genocide against the Tutsi. They continue to live there free. We have more than 500, hundreds of people indicted by the ICTR that continue to live free in the DRC. And it really then situates the work that I do in that space of the responsibility of the state to hold people accountable, because there is only so much that I can do. For Myanmar, that's again another situation that we've followed for a very long time. Again, Myanmar, huge failure of the state to protect its people. The state actually declared people who live in Myanmar as stateless, the Rohingya people. And there's so much that's going on with the Rohingya people in terms of accountability, because, you know, the kind of work that we do, we work under this convention that's called the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And so there's prevention and there's punishment. And we always say when prevention fails, then punishment steps in. So, but they overlap. So, like, as we've had an investigative team, a commission of inquiry that went into Myanmar and put together this very solid report. And then we have an ongoing, it's called the IMM team, the independent inquiry into Myanmar. I forget what the other M stands for. That's also ongoing. We have this small country called the Gambia that took Myanmar to the International Court of Justice on behalf of the Rohingya people. We've had decisions, provisional measures coming out of that. We've had the International Criminal Court taking up indictments, and despite the fact that Myanmar is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, so they did so because some of these people in Bangladesh. Anyway, it's all part of that. And so for Bosnia-Herzegovina, we've had quite a bit of, I would say, if there's a space that I have pushed back against genocide denial, because it is so rampant, it is so in your face, it is incredible, the amount of genocide denial there.
Is it more than Eastern Congo?
Yes.
Why would you say that?
It is more than Eastern Congo because in Bosnia-Herzegovina, it is everywhere. It is within the structures of the society. It is, and if I may, for example, give an example. Recently, we got a resolution in New York. The member states passed a resolution that recognized July 11th as the International Day for commemorating the Srebrenica genocide. There was huge, the amount of lobbying against that resolution is like something you have never seen. And in the lobbying against the resolution were arguments that were put forward that were actually made by the lawyers for the accused. And these are arguments that are being made by people in positions of responsibility. when the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia determined very conclusively that a genocide had happened in Srebrenica, and convicted quite a number of people for genocide, including the former president Karadzic, including the former general Ratko Mladic. Then what they began to do, they started celebrating, and I'm talking about just one part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, but which is half of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Republika Srpska. They celebrate these genocidaires, people who are actually convicted. They have big billboards, big murals with them. There are places that you go to where you're driving and all you see are billboards of these people commemorating them as heroes. We have So we have they came together. They put together a commission of inquiry. This commission of inquiry, they brought experts, and what they were doing was to determine that a genocide did not happen. They were saying the courts are wrong, despite the fact that these courts, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, like the prosecutors, the judges, they were all international, but they were saying that the courts were wrong. So when I talk about genocide denial, when I first went to Bosnia-Herzegovina, you could hardly open a newspaper without finding something about this genocide that did not happen. And they did not even have a genocide denial law. That was something that we had to work to push through. I mean, it's been such a journey. And when I say that it's the people themselves who can give you this feedback, the last time I was in Bosnia-Herzegovina, last year, I went for the commemoration, and there was this woman. So she was shouting, and she could hardly walk. She had a disability, and so she was shouting something across the street. And I asked, "What is she saying?" And they said, "No, she's saying she wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." Then she came, and then she told me, "Okay, I don't speak her language. She doesn't speak my language." But she just said to me, "I've seen you on TV. I've heard the things you say about this country. I want to tell you we are grateful." It was so moving. Like I got like a new lease of life from that woman on that street in Sarajevo. And recently there was a tweet also by a professor whom I have never met, whom I don't know. And he said that out of all the people who work in human rights, he said nobody has fought for the people of Srebrenica more than I have. So I was very, very grateful when I saw that. Yeah, so it's a difficult question you've asked me. We can't measure success because this is the perpetrators. They sometimes plan better than us who work on prevention. If you think about the spaces you've just mentioned right now, you've spoken about Palestine. Think about the number of weapons and the kind of weapons that are in use right now. In prevention, when shall we ever catch up with these drones and artificial intelligence and all these new methods of fighting that are coming up? So I would say the key thing is that leadership continues to be so core in terms of taking countries forward, in terms of supporting prevention. And I can tell you, if you look at budgets everywhere, including at the UN, that the prevention budget will never ever get to even a ninth, or I don't even know what percentage of the budgets that we have when crises actually happen. Because when crises happen, then money is thrown into the crisis. But those of us speaking about prevention and saying, look, this is going to happen, we are not able to convince people. People need a crisis for them to make any move towards something.
Did you ever think that, we're talking about prevention, if you asked me the same question that I asked you, I would ask myself, because your job is genocide prevention, your success is to ensure that genocides don't happen. That's how I would measure your success. Have you stopped a genocide from happening? And just a quick question. When you see all of this happening around you, because the ones that I mentioned, those are things that are actually happening as we speak, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in Palestine, you were not really able to prevent those instances of genocide. And that's really what I had meant when I was saying, how do you judge a success? It's because when I think about what happened here in Rwanda, you know, it wasn't enough that Dallaire wrote the famous fax to the UN. That's not enough. If people still die, you've still fundamentally failed. I'm not saying you're a failure. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just kind of wondering, how do you, those points that I've raised and the points that you've raised, how do you kind of figure out, okay, this is a success for me, even though the things on the ground are still not where I wish they were?
You know, I see that question a lot, like on our social media pages. People say, how many genocides have you prevented? And I think to myself, who walks up to a policeman and says, how many murders have you prevented?
That would be a fair question, though.
Yeah. Who does that? How do you situate me in that space where the perpetrators are completely free and nobody is asking them any questions about why they're perpetrating genocide, but you are coming to ask me, have I stopped a genocide from happening? We don't ask that question of policemen. We don't walk up to them and say, how many rapes have you prevented? We don't ask them that kind of thing. Because the focus is completely wrong. The focus should be on the perpetrator. The focus should be on the people in Palestine who are producing these guns, these weapons that I'm talking about. They are producing weapons, the kind of which we've never seen. Like every other day, the military industrial complex is coming up with these weapons that to be used against human beings. Nobody is asking them any question. We are not asking any question of this very willing seller, willing buyer markets for guns. When you look at the Sahel, and the place is flooded with guns, and these guns, there are people buying and there are people selling. Nobody is asking them questions.
But maybe
when I speak to, yeah, you should. When we are calling, for example, on the generals in Sudan and telling them, please sit in a room and just agree and give instructions to your armies to stop fighting each other so that Sudan can be at peace. So we are pleading with them to do that. Go into a room and talk, you know?
So you're sitting down.
So sit down and talk and agree, and please ask your people your people Sudan is bigger than both of you, and that really you should be able to prevent this. That's where you should be lighting fires. You should light fires under those generals because I have done so much. So, for example, like for Sudan, with my 10 statements that I keep on talking about, my brief to the Security Council. Security Council is the highest decision-making organ of the international community. And I briefed them and I gave them a very, very strong brief. And I told them every risk factor in our analysis, Sudan ticks every single risk factor. So what I'm telling you, because you know, I cannot determine, I do not have the mandate to determine whether a genocide is happening or has happened or is actually occurring. What I say is that these risk factors in this particular situation exist. And when I say that we are ticking every single box and that we have no mitigating factors, I'm basically saying this situation is now out of control. So The other thing that I find, because I've worked in this field for many, many, many years, this field of prevention, where you keep being asked to prove your success, to keep being asked, that kind of thing. And yet we do know that you can never prove what you prevented because it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So in some instances, like you can have some very clear measures. For example, when I was working in my own country in Kenya, we were working towards an election free of violence. Mm. And we did that for 2 successive elections, and then for the third one, we were able to get that election free of violence. So you could actually say we prevented. But then, of course, when you're talking about prevention, you don't prevent alone. And often people forget that states hold sovereignty very close. You can't play around with the state's sovereignty. People feel very strongly about that space that they are in, called a state, and that a state has an obligation to protect its citizens. Mm. So again, we need to light fires under the states where these kind of things are happening. Why are they not protecting their citizens? Yeah. Why do they even need people like me to be telling them, in your country, you have all these risk factors? Mm. I put out that, I remember putting out a statement on the DRC and challenging the leadership of the DRC and saying there are people who live inside this space called the DRC and they need protection from the state. The state must protect all people. So we do know, of course, that there are circumstances where states don't have the capability to protect their people, but then they have the responsibility to also reach out for support and say, look, I need support. This is what is going on in this particular area. That's why regional organizations exist. That's why the East African Community exists. That's why the African Union exists. That's why IGAD exists. That's why ECOWAS exists. All these organizations, ECAS as well, they exist so that the state itself, which does not live on its own, it's a member of a regional community, can speak to that regional community and say, I need help. Mm. Yeah. So at the end of the day, what we do, like our work in the UN is very mandate focused. Mm-hmm. You do what the Security Council has asked you to do. Mm. The Security Council has asked me to give early warning, to build capacities to prevent genocide, and to build consensus within UN organizations in terms of working together to prevent genocide. So there are clearly places where that becomes impossible. So like, for example, in Sudan, we know the government of Sudan they closed down the UNITAMs, so which was the UN presence on the ground. They asked them to leave. And so in that particular situation, when now we come back to the UN and ask the UN, what have you done? If you don't have presence on the ground, how will you even help the people on the ground? So it's a very, I would say, dynamic, I would say it's a situation where that requires huge amounts of work. Like our office, we've mapped the whole world. Like we have everything. We know which country is on the tipping edge, which one is not on the tipping edge. We speak to all this before we even go public. We've spoken to so many international, like civil society, local civil society, international civil society. We've spoken to anybody that we think can help to get the situation in control. But if we do not speak to the fact of political will, if we do not speak to the fact of good leadership, like leaders who think that who care for the people who live within their countries, if we do not think about how leaders use hatred to mobilize divisions, ethnic divisions, racial divisions, if we do not think about guns in the wrong hands and how they are used, and not even guns, even weapons like machetes, like in the wrong hands, if we do not think about places where institutions like the police are not strong enough to protect the population, where the judiciary is compromised, where the school system is producing students who are themselves perpetrators. I mean, it needs a whole of society approach, and it's absolutely important that we keep in mind that prevention should actually be everybody's duty. Prevention is not something you keep somewhere and say, okay, we are about to kill each other, come and prevent.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting, the story that you told us, you were telling me earlier about, that lady in Bosnia who walked to you and really said, you're doing something, and your voice is needed, and how that made you feel. I want to touch on that, on your feelings. Every day that I wake up, I'll go on my Twitter or on TikTok, and you'll see images of just instances of genocide all over the world. It's on you can't miss it. And you as a person, as an official whose literal raison d'être is to ensure that those things that we are now seeing, in partnership with communities, as you said, those things don't happen. And these things are happening, how is your mental health? How is Wairimu's mental health? The reason I ask this question is, it's a well-known story, maybe, I don't know if you've heard of it, about Romeo Dallaire. He was the former commander of the UN troops here during the genocide, the UNAMIR commander. Years after witnessing what happened in Rwanda, he had a mental breakdown. He was suffering from PTSD of the things that he had seen. And he put a lot of blame on himself for what he believes he wasn't able to do, the lives he wasn't able to save. How do you survive as a human being? How do you wake up every day, go to work, fight as hard as you can, have some good days, if we look at what's happening in the world, a lot of bad days as well? How do you just keep moving forward, keep having a good disposition, keep being able to smile and think, okay, this job that I'm trying to do, it means something?
I've been doing this for a long time. So before I started working on prevention of genocide in the UN, I was mediating armed conflict. I've worked in northern Nigeria for many years. I was there deep in the villages, in communities. And I mediated a peace process of 29 ethnic communities. And it was an especially painful process because by the time we were done, peace processes take a long time, like about an year or something. So we've been meeting and meeting and meeting. So the way we structure it is that you ask the communities what are the root causes of the conflict that they are going through, and then you ask them how long that has gone on, the timeline. You ask them who they have grievances against, and who they think has grievances against them. And then you also ask them what their recommendations are. And on the basis of that, then you're able to get very clear ideas on what you should be discussing. And my approach was like every week, I would make sure we get an outcome. And then that outcome, they would sign on to it. And then at the end of the year, we have all these outcomes, then they become the peace agreement. And I've worked in many places, not just in Nigeria. I've worked in the Philippines. I've worked in Myanmar, in places where There was, I always work on ethnic conflict. So like the 29 ethnic communities I was talking about, that particular process, one of the reasons it's so painful for me is because the war was going on. They were fighting each other even as we were continuing. And by the time we were done, I would say about 30% of the room, people had died. And they had, like, so people were sitting there negotiating, and then they would go home and we wouldn't see them anymore. And I was only able to do so because I'd been working in Kenya for many years. And you know, Kenya has very deep fault lines. And we've had post-election violence for many, many, many years. And at some point, the University of San Diego, that was in 2022, they had been, I used to pride myself on being very strong, you know, like I was the one, I used to say my tears are so far. So then I went to the University of San Diego, and they named me Woman Peacemaker of the Year, and then they gave me like some space to just relax, like for 2 months. And then I started to cry. I would be crying, like we would be talking like this, and it wasn't crying, I don't know what to call it crying. Tears would just be rolling down my face the whole day. I don't know where they were coming from, you know? So then there was this woman who came to speak to me, a therapist, and she told me, because I would tell her even when I wake up in the morning, my pillow was completely wet. And she told me, you know, you have serious trauma, but you haven't dealt with it because of all the issues you've been seeing. And so she told me to imagine myself. She did 2 things. First, she gave me a little pot. She said, this is your gift. And I said, oh, thank you very much. And then she moved her hand, and then she touched the table, and the pot fell and broke. And then she said, I'm so sorry. So we picked up the pieces, we fixed them with glue. And then she said, oh, you know something? So all this time, I hadn't figured out that there was anything happening around this pot. But she said, you know, I give you a perfect pot, but you are this pot, the broken one. Like, and I still have that pot. And she said, don't you look for perfection. You want people to have peace all the time. You want people to stop fighting. You want people to be together all the time. But that's not human nature. Human beings can veer towards evil. And then the other thing she told me, which I always tell our team anytime when we are going somewhere, she told me that I should always picture my mind as a sieve, not a container. And she said, you must learn to sieve so that what remains is what you can actually do, what you can provide a solution for, but the rest has to go down. So I'm always telling them, be a sieve, not a container. Be a sieve, not a container. Because I can tell you the pressure is so high. The pressure is so intense. I have found myself on at least 3 occasions leaving the office and going in the wrong direction and getting to a point and thinking, wait a minute, what am I doing here? And then now I find my way home because the pressure is very, very intense. You know, I have a global mandate. So you've asked me about just 4 situations. I can tell you, if you know the kind of situations we deal with on a daily basis, you wouldn't even believe it. Like how many fires we are putting out, like all over the world, things that need to be done urgently. And when people are calling you, they are calling you or writing to you or reaching out to you because they expect you to do something. And the people often refer to whatever is happening to them as genocide. So like, for example, you've said you referred to a genocide in Palestine. It hasn't been determined so by a court of law. The only genocides that we refer to as having been determined, as what we refer to as genocides, are those that have been determined so by international criminal tribunals. And we know, for example, there are some countries like Argentina, Ethiopia, they've tried people for genocide. But in the interest of ensuring that there is like completely above board, like it's only what international criminal tribunals have determined as genocide that we call genocide. So the genocide against the Tutsi and the Srebrenica genocide. So essentially, people feel that unless they use the word genocide, people will not understand the pain that they are going through. Other people weaponize the word, they instrumentalize the word, but it's very rare for me to walk out of the office and not find somebody standing out there saying, genocide, we need help. And so you just need to be assertive. So I look at those people with deep empathy, very deep empathy, because you can't stand in a street with a sign saying genocide unless you feel very, very deeply about it. But I also understand how much I can do. And so like my mind gets into the sieve space where I sieve what needs to be done, and then I just think in this particular situation, this is what needs to be done. Like I can't handle everything.
On the 23rd of this month, so maybe a few days back, you visited Congolese, I saw on your Twitter, you visited Congolese refugees in Hamira refugee camp. I've also had a chance to not visit the camp, but I've had a chance to speak to various Congolese refugees, and their stories are quite horrendous. You know, it's stories of murder and rape and displacement and targeted killings and hate speech. It's quite ugly. When you listened to these Congolese speak, they're sharing their stories with you. Is there a particular story that really touched you more than some of the others?
Yes, there was. I listened to quite a number of people, so we were going from one space to the other. Our colleagues from the UN High Commission for Refugees were taking us around the camp. And the head of the team here, her name is Aissatou. We moved from the first place where we listened to the older people who had quite a sequence of events, because they were talking about, in this year, this is what happened. Then I came to Rwanda, and then I went back, and then I went to Burundi, and then I went back. I mean, a life of back and forth of trying to protect their lives. And then we moved to another space where I met these young women. I don't even think they're young women, they're just young girls. And these girls, so I greeted them, and then I asked them to speak, like, good, does anybody want to speak? So the first girl who spoke, she was carrying a baby, and she said that she was raped. She said she was raped by the FDLR, and she said when she went home, her mother could not come to terms with the baby that she was carrying, and so she had to leave home, and then her mother and brothers chased her away. And then she said she went looking for her father and pleaded with him to allow her back home. She went back home, and by this time now she had the baby. And again, her brothers chased her from home. And then she decided she needs to walk to Rwanda to find refuge. So this girl, she said she was 18 years old, but the way she was talking like a 70-year-old. Yeah. Like you could just see her whole childhood had gone. And I thought about that baby and the future of that baby. Like, what's the future of that baby? What's the future of that girl? And then we were about to leave. But then I had said, does anyone else want to speak? And there was a girl who'd already stood up. But the team was hurrying me along. They were saying, oh, we need to go because we don't have time. You have to go back. We have another interview, the way, like when I'm here in Rwanda, I have so many appointments. But then I said, no, she's already standing up. Let's just listen to her. And then this girl gave us her story. And she was talking about how her family was murdered and how she found them, how she walked home and she saw the blood coming through the door. But before she talked about how her family was murdered, she was able to explain very systematically the discrimination against the Congolese Tutsi, like what has been happening to them, the tax they have to pay to militias, how many the cows they've had to pay as tax, how her father kept being taken away, like kidnapped, like for ransom, and then they would have to pay to get him back. How the demands on the family kept increasing and increasing. They had to give out everything in the home, so that by the time the killings were even happening, like the family was so demoralized, they were wondering, so what next? Like we faced everything possible. Then when she told us how she saw the blood coming through the door, she knew like something has happened here. She couldn't bring herself to get into the house. And then she went back, and then she came back again. And when she came back again, what she found was that she opened the door and the first thing she saw was her mother's head. So then she said how she had to go and look for other families who would help her. They came with sacks to put her family in. And when she was giving this story, so this room that we were in was a room of about 30 girls. Some had babies, but all of them had a shared experience. They'd been raped, all of them. And they began to cry, all of them. Their sound of them sobbing, it's a sound like all of us will carry like for the rest of our lives. Those girls, it was so difficult to listen to that girl. And she, as she was speaking, there's a picture that I tweeted with, you saw it? And I was saying, they say pictures speak 1,000 words. If you look at that picture, if you enlarge it on every single face, you'll see the impact of what she was saying. You see how, like my colleagues were all looking down like this, like her words were so heavy. You see the girls who are seated in a circle, they are crying. You can see the tears in their eyes. You can see they're wiping their eyes. And it was such a moment. And up to now, and I've been in Rwanda many, many times, but this particular time, and I've been here now for, tomorrow I think will be my 1 week here in Rwanda. And usually I don't spend time in any country. I don't have that time. I don't even go back twice to a country. And it's been the most impactful thing that has happened to me since I came this week. Because it visualized for me these things I've been saying about the Congolese Tutsi. I have had a team from my office go to the Kivus and spend time there, like a month, and come back with a very solid report. And I myself went to DRC. But I never encountered the kind of vulnerability that I saw in that girl and in the girls in that room. Just thinking to myself, first, the fact that they are Congolese Tutsi means that they came into this world carrying a burden of a genocide that had been carried out against the Tutsi. And then they have to relive this now. Like it has to happen again to them. It's completely unacceptable. It grounded me in a way that I could never have been grounded by any report that I read anywhere, because I will never forget the sound of the sound of the sobs of those girls, the way they were crying, and that girl, her voice, the way she described the situation. I don't think, and we've had a debrief as a team, all of us, and we had the exact same feeling, all of us. We felt we were in the presence of a crime. You felt it. We stood there and we felt a crime has happened to these girls. Yeah. So when I tweeted, and again with the tweet, we were having all these conversations about exactly what should we say, what can carry the weight of what we have just seen and heard. And so that tweet spoke to that particular situation.
That's powerful. This is the last question to you, and thank you for spending an hour plus with me.
Yeah.
Very often, global powers seem to play a huge role in creating not just the conditions for genocide, but some even go so far as to participate in genocide itself. Here in Rwanda, we know about, there are countless reports, studies made both internationally and by the government of Rwanda about, for example, the French state's role in the years before the genocide and even during the genocide. It's interesting that some of these powers sometimes even are your bosses. They are in the members of the UN Security Council. They are the ones who are supposed to protect us or protect the world. They've given themselves that kind of responsibility, that we are the Security Council. We are keeping you secure. How do you navigate, as someone who works fundamentally for the UN Security Council? Yes, you do work for the Secretary-General, but everyone works at the behest of the Security Council. How do you navigate sometimes that contradiction that, you know, the people who should be helping you do your work are sometimes in the background, silent accomplices, or sometimes even very loud accomplices to genocides? Do you not feel that you're almost put in an impossible position as someone whose mandate fundamentally is to create better conditions for people who might be victims of genocide?
I would say, and as I always say, one of my predecessors told me, welcome to the impossible mandate. And there is quite a lot of geopolitics at play in the world and in the UN, in the Security Council in New York. What I have learned works for me is to work with member states so that, and when I say member states, I mean countries. It's UN language to say member states. Yeah, to work with countries, specific countries, so that then they help me advance the agenda that needs to be advanced. Because I, myself, you know, and the Secretary-General, like we belong to the Secretariat, and so we usually say that the Secretariat is, that the countries, the member states are our bosses, as you've said. So what I do is identify a country that then helps me to push forward the agenda that I need to push forward. So like, for example, we came here to Rwanda with journalists from all over the world. We've put together this plan of action for countering hate speech and also addressing incitement to violence that could lead to genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. So what will happen to this plan is that we will, of course, complete it. We will ensure it's implementable. It has all these actionables in the recommendations. We'll pick up those recommendations and work with them. Some of those recommendations could include working with the member state to get a resolution, like in the General Assembly or in the Security Council. So for this particular plan of action, the ownership is Rwanda. So I'll be working with the Rwandan government, with the permanent representative in New York, who will then push forward for me the agenda. So it doesn't have to be me out there at the front getting all the flack. It's Rwanda standing there and saying, we have a plan of action for countering hate speech and addressing, you know, incitement to violence that could lead to genocide. And then Rwanda then is able to push through all these agendas through the General Assembly, through the Security Council. So we've done something similar in the past. We have a plan of action for religious leaders and actors, again, to prevent incitement to violence that could lead to genocide. This one, we worked with the Kingdom of Morocco. And so we drafted it in Fez, a city called Fez, So we have the phase plan of action. So this phase plan of action, we worked with it. It's now 6 years old. Last year, when it was 5 years old, we went back to phase to look at what we have achieved. And it's quite a lot because with Morocco, the Kingdom of Morocco drafted a resolution. And within that resolution, we were able to put in a request to get an international day for countering hate speech. And that's how June 18, the General Assembly passed the resolution by Morocco. So we have to create relationships, of course, with all member states. So I create relationships with every single member state. But over and above that, we map, because we are an office that has to cover the whole world. So, and we can't do that without specific constituencies. So we map constituencies and then they help us move the agendas forward. So we have another plan of action, we call it the game plan. This one, it's with the United States. And it focuses on on working with these people who shoot people, like the young man who tried to shoot the former President Trump the other day. That particular demographic of young people, we describe them as a young person sitting in the basement, very tech aware, so lonely and being influenced by all these pieces. Because we have quite a number of those kind of people in the US. Sometimes they're not young. So we came up with this plan of action. This one, we work with sports leagues. So we have the NBA, we have the NFL, we have NASCAR. I mean, we have all the big leagues. We also have the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pittsburgh Penguins. And the whole idea came from the community of Pittsburgh, where there was an anti-Semitic attack in the synagogue called the Tree of Life Synagogue, the worst anti-Semitic attack in US history, where a gunman went to the synagogue and shot quite a number of people. And so this informed this game plan. And we also went to Buffalo, where another gunman went and shot a black community. And these people, they post on social media, they say, we hate black people, we hate migrants, we hate women, we hate Jews, we hate Muslims, and we are going to kill them. And then they go and kill them. So we've been making, this game plan speaks to connecting the hate that is put out by this person and the crime. And so that is a game plan of the United States. It's a game plan that was done within the United States. We first drafted it in Pittsburgh. So the whole space, we have to, it's a difficult space for me to navigate because I'm calling out countries. I'm telling them this is what I'm seeing happening in your country. I'm seeing risk factors in your country. And of course, the ambassadors who are sent to New York, they're sent there to defend their countries. So of course, they counter. They send letters, they call demarches. They send very strong demarches saying, like specifically like about me, this is what you're saying about my country, it's completely incorrect. They write to the Secretary-General, So anyway, it's a minefield all the time. We have to walk on eggshells. It's the most difficult mandate in the UN. And at the same time, you have to make sure that things happen. So I do it gently. I'll speak to you in a very gentle way and talk to you very gently, but I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you, in your country, you have risk factors for genocide. This category of people, this particular group of people are at risk of genocide, and this is what is happening to them. And I have the conversation first, and then I say, and you need to tell me what you're doing about it, because I'm going to issue a statement. Yeah, sometimes I issue the statement, and then the statement is the one that brings the conversation, because I also don't want to get into that space where we start negotiating. Okay, now stop, don't write about it, don't say it right now. So then I put it out. But what helps most is the Secretary-General, because he always has my back. All the time, he just tells me, just go out and do your work. Like, don't even worry that I'll be somewhere thinking that what you're doing is wrong. Just do it. Whatever you need to say it. We'll deal with whatever comes out of whatever you say. So that's the dynamic. Because with the geopolitics and the wars going on right now, that have enhanced those geopolitics.
It's actually really harmful when you see and now there are different levels of powers, right? So before you had to just deal with the main global powers, and now there's another level of powers that are emerging, and they are also trying to project themselves, and they're starting to become problematic as well. And I can only imagine just how complicated your job is, and just how many balls you have up in the air. I just wish you the best of luck. I think as humanity, we wish you the best of luck, because there's a lot of pain and suffering, and I think as Africans, we need your voice. We need a strong voice, a strong African woman's voice. Sometimes I feel that there's something special about African women. I think there's a certain amount of power that we have, innately you have. And your voice is so important. And I thank you for the work that you do. As a country that went through genocide, I think the work that you do is so important. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate the fact that you've taken an hour to sit down with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time too. And for the space for us to have this conversation.
If I can ask you just one more last question.
Yes, please.
There are a lot of young people who watch this. As I told you, a lot of what we'd call the Gen Zs.
Yes.
If you could, I want you to speak to them directly. Mm-hmm. What message do you have for them?
You know, I am the mother of a Gen Z. Mm. And so we have lots of conversations in terms of what exactly does his world look like and what does my world look like. This is a generation that has been born knowing the importance of technology and knowing how to use this technology. They've been born with advantages that we didn't have. They have been born with the capacity of reaching each other across the world. We didn't have that capacity. And they can shape a world that my generation and the generation before was not able to shape. They have the capacity. In my generation, like, we never thought about self-employment. We were looking for jobs all the time, writing applications. Like, our minds were fixated on you have to be employed by somebody. This generation has self-employed. They develop content. They are creative. They write. They do so many things. So for them, I would like to ask them to pay attention to this crime of genocide. If you think about the person who created the name genocide, his name is Raphael Lemkin, and he was a Polish Jewish lawyer. But when he was a very small boy, when he was about 11 years or so, he remembers asking his mother, these Christians who are fed to the lions, you know, like when you read all those books about Christians fed to the lions, like, why didn't anyone call the police? And he said that as he grew older, he realized that actually, even if anyone had called the police, nobody could have come. The police would not have come, because it was then accepted that you can kill groups of people and get away with it. It's incredible that in this day and age, and these are the kind of things that young people need to be examining and asking questions of themselves, like Raphael Lemkin did as a young person. Like, you wouldn't accept to live next to a murderer, but you accept to live next to a genocidaire. Like, why do you accept this crime of killing, groups of people based on their ethnicity and or their race, but you will not accept like to live near a rapist or even to be friends to a rapist. Like there are questions that young people need to ask themselves, and there are conversations that young people need to have, unpacking this crime of genocide. I've tried so much as when I took over this mandate, this position, to ensure that genocide, which is has always been interpreted as this very international norm that is dealt with by international courts of law, that maybe can percolate sometimes to the regional level and the national level, but never the community level. I've tried to make it like to get to the community level for people to understand that when genocides happen, they happen to ordinary people, to people who are living, like teachers and students. They happen to ordinary people, and that people have to know what to do. They have to recognize those risk factors of when genocide is happening, and they have to know what to do about it. So for me, actually, my ideal dream, I say this to my son, I tell him, I would love to work with young people who would come up with this, because we already have the risk factors. We've already put that together. We have mitigating factors, what you need to do to these risk factors to reduce the incidence of genocide from happening. But this is something that we haven't done there's no technology around it. We are very, I don't want to say manual.
Analog.
Yes, we are very analog in terms of the way we do this kind of thing. Like it's something that I would like to interest young people in doing, so that they can immediately, they themselves, call out their countries or their leadership and say, in this particular place, we see these risk factors for genocide. What are you doing to protect these particular people? They have the capacity to do that. And they have the capacity to do it not only for their own countries, even for other countries. If anything is happening in Asia, people in Africa young people have the capacity to call this out. So in terms of connections, in our days, we used to have pen pals. You'd write a letter and then you send, and then you receive a letter after 6 months. But within the space of a few minutes, you can actually write out and put out all these issues. And so I spoke to some young people in Baltimore the other day, and I was telling them, but why don't we create a movement, like a movement led by young people on prevention of genocide? Like, why can't we do it? Why can't we have a list from young people that says, this is the way you recognize when a genocide is happening. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If this is happening in your community, then you have risk factors for genocide. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If this is happening, it means that the risk of genocide are very low. And how can you work like in every space? Like if, for example, the young people living here in Kigali, how can the young people in Kigali work to ensure that Kigali is a genocide-free zone? How can they do that? And they have the capacity to do it. So some of these things we do. We have some young people in our office, but they are obviously not enough. They are not as many as we need, because we do need a movement. We need a movement that says, okay, enough. And now this is we are mapping genocide now, and this is how genocide looks like. This is what existed in Rwanda in 1993 before the genocide in 1994. And this is what existed in Srebrenica in 1994 before the genocide in 1995. And if we deal with these issues, it means that then we will not have a genocide. Yeah, so we will be very happy to work with them. Yeah, so I'm very glad. Like I see the vibrancy of young people, the things they do, it's just incredible. Like I look at the artwork they create, like the thinking. Right now we have a whole conversation with young people in Kenya that has been, agendas have been set by young people, agendas that our political leaders are responding to. And I think young people need to recognize their agency in agenda setting on the prevention of genocide.
Under Secretary Nderitu, thank you so much for joining me on the long form.
Thank you very much for having me.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes, it was nice. It was a nice conversation. Yeah, and sometimes I don't talk enough about these things. So I have interviews, they are short. I don't have this kind of conversation often, where I really think deeply in terms of what is it that needs to be done. I don't have, in many cases, conversations where I don't even know the questions, like you just coming at me with the questions, which is a really good thing. So I think it's a really good thing, and I hope we can do this maybe some other time when we can look at what we've achieved, especially with this plan of action that we just done here, in which, by the way, I didn't mention that I proposed to the journalists that we call it the Nyamata Plan of Action. Because I want, each time we say the first plan of action, people say, oh, FEZ, why FEZ? Then we explain why FEZ, which really is that it was drafted in FEZ. But I want something more meaningful. I want people to ask, why Nyamata? And I say, well, we'll have it in the plan of action, something that says, Nyamata, this is what happened in Nyamata. Nyamata was a church where people were killed. Really? People killed in a church? How is that possible? Like, we wanted to generate that conversation, a conversation that also leads to the role of the media in the genocide against the Tutsi here in Rwanda. There was a Catholic nun in Nyamata. She spoke on radio. She said, this is what's happening here in 1992. And then she was killed because of saying the things that she said. And so if then we call it the Nyamata Plan of Action, it means the whole world, because we create policy for the world, like as the UN. So the whole world will know where Nyamata is. So for me, that is really the key thing. And if we have a QR code, like in the Plan of Action, where when you're reading the Plan of Action and the QR code like shows you Nyamata and its story, I think that will ground people into understanding why it's so important for media and journalists to have a plan of action to counter hate speech that could prevent incitement to violence, that could lead to genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Very long name, but there's no way to shorten it, and because it speaks to the real issues.
I mean, I hope that plan of action, the Nyamata document, will be launched here. That would be amazing. And if it does, I would love to invite you back to have a sit down, and then we just walk through it and educate my listeners or my viewers more about it, and continue having these conversations about genocide and what we must do as a global community and as Rwandans to prevent genocides from happening, not just here, but elsewhere in the world. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed the conversation today, share your thoughts with us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.